Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So we're looking at chapter 4, basically. So what we want to talk about is the relationship between the pattern of a civilization, crafts and sciences, and the Islamic sciences. Okay, there's these three systems. The life cycle of a civilization, the crafts and sciences that this civilization begets and promotes, and its relationship to the Islamic sciences. Okay, so I'm gonna put it in a context of a question. And let me just pause this for a second. I'm gonna go here. Let's stop share for a second. So basically, Ibn Khaldun has told us, one second, that here we have timeline. Okay. And basically our civilization is like this. Okay. So then we have basically these kind of he talks about, we spoke about how it collapses, right? When people don't feel there's any justice, there's no point working. People don't feel they're represented or they have share any glory, right? There's all this oppression, all these things happen. That's like kind of the end of the civilization. You have the beginning of the civilization, which is rough, tough people who aren't used to luxury and aren't sophisticated. So there's also good things about them, but the point is they are simple. Okay? So Ibn Khaldun now talks about sciences and crafts. Okay? And he says, in this beginning time, everything is very simple. Okay? And then it becomes perfected based on the market demand. People want nicer food. The simple food becomes complex. Okay? People want better machinery. The simple machinery gets more complex. People want faster machinery. The machinery becomes this. People want cheaper cars. It gets cheaper, etc. Right? Why is that important? Because we have a movement today, right? A movement that started about 200 years ago, maybe, which is called the Salafi movement. The Salafi movement says, understand and apply Islam as it is here. Okay? Understand Islam and understand and apply and teach and discuss Islam as it is here, not as it was here. Okay? Now, the call to do this comes here. This is important. Okay? So, post-Islamic glory, post-colonial, we get a call to say, go here. Right? And in reality, it's much more complex than I'm saying, but that's one thing. And obviously that makes a lot of sense because we're talking about religion at the end of the day. We are not talking about iPhones. Okay? So any person who's like, would you prefer to follow the Islam of Prophet Muhammad or Tajuddin Subki in the 8th century? It's kind of a no-brainer, right? Obviously, as the Prophet taught Islam, that's the Islam that I want. As they applied Islam, that's what I want to do. Everybody identifies with and wants to emulate what we call the Salaf, right? That's a key concept. Because we're religious and we're conservative, we always want to go back, right? That's the nature of Islam. So there's a slight difference, right, with technology and something else, right? And food, right? And education or something like that. Like, so naturally it's going to be the case. But here's the problem. What they don't understand is that crafts, meaning how to make baskets, how to make food, how to cook, warfare, building, are no different than anything else. So what we see happening to crafts, meaning that they are simple, and then through demand plus cross-generational cooperation. I'm going to write it out. Okay, I'll delete this here. Right, I'm going to put this here. There's all demand. Right, market demand, meaning society wants these things. So there's demand along with cross-generational cooperation. Let's put it over here. These two things. We get refinement of everything, not just how to make baskets, not just how to make books, not just how to print stuff, not just how to make catapults or swords, right? So, so this is what people don't understand. So what people think is there is Islam of this period and Islam of this period, and they're not the same. For example, in this period, classical Islamic history, everybody follows the form of their hib. Say, which madhab did the Prophet follow? None. Okay, I don't want to follow a single madhab. Everybody in this period, I'm just speaking historically here, okay? Everyone in this period is either Ash'ari, Maturi, or Hanbali. That's historical, right? That's what they are, okay? Across the Muslim world, from Spain to China, that's what everybody is, right? Whether you like it or not, it's irrelevant, but that's what it is historically, right? You say, okay, which group was the Prophet ﷺ? Was he Ash'ari? No. Was he Maturidi? No. Was he Hanbali? No. Okay, I'm not interested in anything. So it makes sense. It's a kind of good theory, but it's not actually true. So the question is, right? The question is, when you say advanced things, what does that mean? So let's look at Tajweed, for example. How the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam studied Tajweed, how we study Tajweed. So how did the Prophet ﷺ study Tajweed? He didn't, I guess you could say. So did anybody teach him how to pronounce the kha or the qaf? Was he just was he just doing that naturally, right? He grew up in lands. Oh, right. So, he's Arab, right? Of that time. So half of Tajweed, or more than half of Tajweed, is just natural anyway. Okay? If you ask the Prophet ﷺ the difference between a voiced and unvoiced letter, Jahar and Hams, he probably wouldn't know what you're talking about. Okay? He learnt from Sayyidina Jibreel, right? How did he teach? In an informal way, right? He taught in an informal way. There's no form, and he just recited Quran, and people copied it, and they noticed things, right? So again, more than half of Tajweed is just natural to them anyway, because they. So just a note, guys. When you move your mouse, other people can see it. Okay. So anything that goes on the board, other people can see it. Um, so the way that the Prophet ﷺ taught Tajweed was not like the way that we teach Tajweed. So does that mean our tajweed is different to his tajweed?
No, but also the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had to he not had to, but he used tajweed of the tongue of the people that he was talking to. And so when as it in multiple instances of the Salaf, where Omar radiallahu anhu is saying that these people are saying it wrong. And then Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he corrected it. No, this is how I taught him, or this is how I taught them. And that developed into multiple situations of pronunciation in forms of tajweed. So it's actually something that was natural and morphing to the tongue of the people during
Okay,
the time of Prophet
so
Muhammad
did the
sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Prophet ﷺ have textbooks and curriculum and terminology of tajweed? Okay, so therefore I don't tell me about qalqala and don't tell me about mudud. I don't want to know because the Prophet ﷺ didn't say it. I'm not going to say it. Okay, so in reality, if we look at this history of tajweed, it is a bit like that. Tajweed took approximately 900 years. Approximately 900 years. Like today, when we interact with Tajweed, we are looking at books, terms, ideas, concepts that are approximately in the 9th century. So we're talking about up here. Timeline, we're looking at this terminology, concepts, variations, authorities, textbooks, reference books that the Salaf never heard of, ever. Not the Salaf, not the Prophet ﷺ. So the claim would be, to heck with all that stuff, I want to follow Islam as it was revealed. So I'm not going to study Tajweed. Does that make sense? Now, they don't actually say that, but that's what they should say, because that's their approach to everything else. Okay? So now we're going to do the same thing. Now we're going to do the same thing. Okay. So I'm going to go and study fiqh, for example. I'm going to study fiqh, and Muhammad Sadiq is talking about daruri time and ikhtiyar time, and he's going to talk about shart of wudu, and he's going to talk about rukn of wudu, and a mustahab of wudu versus a raghiba of the prayer versus a sunnah of the prayer, and sujood sahu, right? And he's going to have all of these terms, and he's going to be quoting Akhdari, and he's going to be quoting Khalil, and so he's going to be quoting authorities that the Prophet ﷺ never heard of. He's going to be quoting terms that the Prophet ﷺ never used. Okay? He's going to organize the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ in a way that the Prophet ﷺ never organized. He's going to give me a curriculum. He's going to say the prayer is, he's going to say things that the Prophet ﷺ would never have said. The Prophet ﷺ spoke about the prayer being accepted, and yet Muhammad Sadiq is going to tell me about the prayer being valid. And so then Muhammad Sadiq is going to say, yeah, but it might be valid but not accepted. So you're trying to say that there is a good prayer that's not accepted? Did the Prophet ﷺ ever say there's a good prayer that's never accepted? So your paradigms, your systems, your organization, all of it is not what the Prophet said. So I'm not interested. I don't want to hear about what Akhtari says or Khalil or I don't know, these people and whatever. I'm not interested. So again, Khalil is written here. I don't care about Khalil being written here. You know, Khalil I think is in the 8th century, 7th or 8th century Khalil. I don't care about it. I'm not interested. I want to know what the Prophet said. Okay? This is their approach. The paradigms that you talk about, not interested. I just want to know what the Prophet said, and that is it. Okay? The same problem then is what is, well, hang on a minute. We've organized what the Prophet said. So you want an unorganized version of what the Prophet said, and we have an organized version, right? So now this person is going to stuck with what? They're not going to do tajweed in principle. They are do tajweed, but that's because they don't understand the history of tajweed. They're going to say, forget fiqh. I'm not Maliki, Shafi, and all that stuff is nonsense. That never existed during the time of the Prophet, so I don't care about it. Throw that out the window. So I don't need a sophisticated version of fiqh. I have the Prophet. Get out of my face. Okay? We're going to come to Aqidah, same kind of discussion. Is there a difference between what Allah is and what Allah does? And they're like, I'm not interested. Don't ask that question. Fine. So throw Aqidah out the window. Throw fiqh out the window. Okay? Usul al-fiqh. If the Prophet ﷺ does something, what does that imply? If the Prophet ﷺ doesn't do something, what does that imply? If something is prohibited, what might that imply? If something is prohibited, what would it not imply? How to use, how to qualify, how to marry texts that are apparently I'm not interested. The Prophet ﷺ did not talk about how to analyze the Quran and Sunnah. He did not do that. Oh, he didn't do that. He did not tell us, he did not give us a system of how to process the Quran and Sunnah. He didn't say that he didn't say that. So I don't need that either. So I don't need a process of how to understand Quran and Sunnah. So all I want is Quran and Sunnah itself. All I want is Quran and Sunnah itself. I don't want anything other than Quran and Sunnah. So then you're going to say, fine, here's a Mus'haf, here's Sahih Bukhari. Say, well, who's Bukhari? Bukhari's here. So now I don't want Bukhari. I just want the hadith itself. But Bukhari is going to say, my teacher said, my teacher said, and this is Sahih, and this is Da'if. So I don't want that. I just want the Quran and Sunnah itself. So you sit with the Mus'haf, you say, well, this is one version, this is narration of so-and-so, and saying, no, no, I just want the Quran itself. So they're asking for something that is very beautiful, but they're asking for the pure initial revelation that is unrefined, right? Like I just want oxygen as it is, or oxygen as it is in the air. I don't want oxygen in my lungs, and I don't want oxygen in my blood, and I don't want oxygen in a bottle. I want it in the air as it is. The problem is two things. Number one, it's inaccessible. So how can you access the hadith in a non-processed way? That's like Google searching. I say I want information from Google in a non-processed way. Can you do that right now? Google, do not organize the information for me. I'm going to ask Google. Google, tell me about New York, but do not organize the hits for me. Tell me about New York, but do not organize the hits for me. Is that going to work, guys? I'm going to press enter. Tell me about New York, but don't organize it. Is it going to work? Searching, searching, processing, processing, processing. Right? New York is often called the city of never sleeps. Why do you process? I want an unprocessed version of New York. I don't, do you see what it did for me? AI overview. New York is often called da, da, da. It processed it for me. How is it possible for you to access something in a non-processed way? If you're not there. So you just want Quran and Sunnah. Like I don't want Sahih Bukhari or Sahih Muslim, or I don't want his version or that version. Everybody is giving you an edited version, a processed version based on certain paradigms, certain this, certain that. Everybody's doing that. So number one, you're asking for something that does not exist. It doesn't exist. Okay? So it's great. You know, as one of the shuyukh said, he says, the Salaf, Asr Islami Mubarak. He says the Salaf is a blessed epoch in Islamic history. It is not a system. So when you get when you read anything about anything, it's always processed. So you want an unprocessed, original, straight out of the packet, you know, I just want it. It doesn't exist. That doesn't exist. I just want to see the dinosaur bone itself. You can't see the dinosaur bone itself. You see a fossil of the dinosaur bone. You don't see the dinosaur itself, ever. I want to see an electron itself. You will never see an electron itself. You see how the electron affects other things and ways of representing those changes in an image, but you never see the electron itself. Okay? So this is a childish way of thinking that I just want Quran and Sunnah itself. So what they will do then is they will say, no, 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 like Bukhari Muslim is fine. I'll have that edited version. Well, that's one edit. That's an edited version of something. One way of looking at the past, one way of editing the past, right? And it's not actually the past itself. Okay? So that's number one. Number two, what was the demand that these people wanted? What did the Salaf want? Did the Salaf want deen or did they want dunya? The Sahaba and Tabi'een, right? The ulama that processed the fiqh of the Salaf, did they want the deen or did they want the dunya? Okay? The ulama that processed that. So the market demand was for deen. People wanted deen. People asked the question, but how do I pronounce that? What does that mean? What does that infer? So this processed version of Islam that you get from here, each stage is what's happening is cross-generational cooperation based on a demand for deen. And then you get to hear the classical works of Islam. You ask me a question and I say, here's a commentary on the Quran. Here's a commentary on the Hadith. The Hadith is sound, it's not sound. This is halal, haram. The classical references of this time, which is roughly from the year 500, right? You get this year approximately from the year like 500, right? Okay, 5th to 8th century, roughly, not 5th, more like 6th, right? Anything, these are the books that we're going to reference because they get to this point up here where people have been pushing for deen. We want to know what Allah wants us to do. We want Allah we want to ask Allah, how should we think? We want to ask the question, what does this verse mean? What does this hadith mean? What should I do about it? So what they produced, which is the form of dhahib of fiqh, which is law and morality, okay? The 2.5 madhabs of aqidah, Ashari, Maturid, and Hanbali, right? And the various other sciences of tajweed, the science of Arabic grammar, other science of hadith methodology, tafsir, ulum al-Quran. What they produced was genuinely useful, right? It's like, I'm digging a hole, Muhammad Sadiq digs for a hole, I continue digging a hole. We're both digging the same hole. So nobody is digging the hole and filling it in again. So what the Salaf wanted is what the Khalaf created, right? The Salaf threw a ball and the ball landed, and that's what we call the Khalaf. That's what we call the late scholars. It's a direct project. The product, that the Khalaf is a product of the Khalaf. The Khalaf, the late scholars, what we see, that what we call like traditional Islamic books, that is the product of the efforts of the early Muslims. So the former dhahib, direct descendants of the madhahib of the Sahaba. And the Sahaba, we find the Salaf had certain madhabs. The word madhab is used by the Sahaba and Tabi'in. It's used, right? So this person is in a very awkward situation. They're saying the ball landed here. It's like this. Somebody had a seed, okay? They threw the seed and it landed and it planted and it became a big tree, and that big tree became a wood. And they're saying, no, I want the seed. So yeah, but this is the product of the seed. This is what it is. So the only way that we can, there's two things that we're going to do. Number one, chaotically, with an unsophisticated, unsystematic way to reanalyze some extractable data from that first period. That's number one. Or number two, slam all of these people. So there's two things that are going to happen. Number one, label all of these people as bad. You weren't good. You weren't genuine. You didn't have knowledge. All your books are stupid. Okay, that's one. And obviously non-Muslims will agree with them. Hence, post-colonial period. So in a post-colonial Muslim world, Muslims hate Muslims. In a post-colonial Muslim world, we're here after the glory. We look back at the glory and said it was all bad. They were all bad people. And they all didn't know anything. Okay, so now we're going to go back here and we are going to try and reconstruct certain things based on some assumptions and ignoring many discussions. They're going to ignore many discussions, okay? And reanalyze it in a chaotic way. Why is it chaotic? Because it's not sophisticated. Like there's no actual system. Does that make sense? It's a bit like, there's, like you come up with a software, the software has problems, so you just smash the computer to pieces and say, I'm going to use a stick instead. It is true the stick has less variables and it's less annoying in some ways, but the stick is vastly less sophisticated and can do much less than the computer. Does that make sense? So that's why, as laity, as the average Muslim, when you ask a question about halal and haram, right? I'm going to answer here. I'm not going to answer here for two reasons. Number one, I cannot access Revelation itself. I can only access an edited version of Revelation, right? And number two, this is a ultra edited version, an ultra explained, an ultra refined version of it. Does that make sense? So I'll give you an example. I can't actually access this, but you asked me the question, if I'm fasting and I make riba, what should I do? Okay, here's a question. I'm fasting and I said something bad about somebody else behind their back. What should I do? So what do you think the answer is, guys? What should I do? Should repent. Okay. Anything else? Continue fasting. Okay. Valid. What do you mean by valid? What does that mean? It has value. The fast has value. You mean? What does that mean? Legally. What do you mean it's legally valid? What does that even mean? I'm not going to court. Right? I don't understand what you mean. It counts as a fast. So you mean I fasted. So do I have to make it up? No maker. Okay. So what you're telling me so far was I was fasting. I said something bad about Muhammad Sadiq behind his back. Okay. You're telling me make Toba. Okay. Continue fasting and don't make it up. Is that correct? That's your answer? Okay. So now what I'm going to try and do is try and do two approaches. Okay. Approach number one, I don't care about what traditional scholars said because I don't have to follow traditional scholars. I just have to follow Revelation. I go back to Revelation and I don't have access to Revelation itself. I'm not a Sahabi. So what I'm going to do though is I'm going to try and find the least processed information possible. So I'm going to go to here. So this is what people will do is they'll go to something like, whoops. They'll go to something like here. So it is processed in reality. A hadith is processed. It's not unprocessed. Things have been edited out based on certain assumptions that may or may not be true. Okay, so you have to understand it's process, it's human creation, it's a human edited version of Revelation. Okay, so that's what's happening. Anyway, and I find a hadith that says here, for example, that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever does not abandon lying words and lying deeds, Allah doesn't need him to fast. Whoever doesn't abandon lying words and lying deeds, Allah doesn't need him to fast. So I'm going to say, if you say something bad about somebody behind their back, Allah doesn't need you to fast. So therefore, don't fast. Seems pretty simple to me. Okay? Like I've gone back as far as I can. I know that it's processed to some extent, but basically this is what the Prophet is quoted to have said, and this is what some scholars believe he said based on certain assumptions. That's what I'm reading. It says whoever, that's what I'm saying. So I come along and say you're wrong. So when you ask me, I don't answer from my head. I go and look at books here. Does that make sense? Whereas you're going here. And you say, well, why does it make sense to go here as opposed to here? Because I'm further up the civilization ladder. There's cross-generational cooperation and demand for deen. So you're not the first person to ask that question, are you? You worship Allah, you love Allah, you fear Judgment Day. You were fasting and you said something bad about somebody, and you're asking the question, what should I do? You are not the first person to ask that question. That question has been asked 50 gazillion times. So what's going to happen then is going to be more process. So the answer up here is very different to your answer to what you assume to be the answer here. It's not actually the answer at all. I mean, that's actually wrong. We would claim there's a wrong understanding of the hadith, right? The correct understanding of the hadith, as mentioned here, is you've broken the reward of the fast, as far as we know. Your fast is valid, meaning you're still fasting, and you don't have to make it up. So you keep fasting, you don't have to make it up. You should make tawbah and hope that Allah accepts it, but He might not. Does that make sense? So here, the amount of processing is huge. Here, the amount of processing is less. This is, maybe we're talking about, I don't know, 100 billion man hours. Here we're talking maybe 1 million. Does it make sense? So it's more processed. So therefore it's better. Therefore it's more reliable. Right? So the assumption is then, no, it's not, because we hate ourselves. We hate our civilization. Our scholars are all bad, corrupt, bad intentions, stupid, distrust. And we should go back as far as we can, right? And we want to go here, or at least we'll pretend to be here, but you're actually like here, right? So it's very important to understand that this da'wah, this mentality is very much like the Shia, right? Notice how the Shia, for example, distrust for the Sahaba, labeling the Sahaba as bad, that everything's bad of the past, right? It's the same kind of idea, same as the Khariji idea. The whole, you'll find these people quote, وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّوكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. They'll quote this, right? If you obey most people, they'll send you astray. So the idea that the underdog is right, okay? So in reality, what we need to do is we need to say, look, we started here. These people built this. These people built this. These people built this. It got to here. It gets a pinnacle of like, this is really, really good. You find what are the reliable books in hadith, the reliable books in fiqh, the reliable books in tafsir, the reliable books in tajweed. What are the curricula that these people have created? What are the reference works? And that's how we study the deen. And that's how we practice the deen. Right? Does that make sense? That's how someone like I function, right? You ask me a question about religion in general or about fiqh. That's how I structure things, right? Here are the textbooks that you like. For example, my friend today, he asked me a question. He said, Fareed, you're teaching a book that was here. Why are you teaching a book that's here when we were here? That's the question he asked me just like literally an hour ago. So his question, totally valid. He's like, why are you referencing something here when I'm here? You know what I'm saying? Like, we have Islam 4.5. Why are you referencing 4.4 or 3.1 or 2.0? You know what I'm saying? So the assumption is that every single processing of the religion is a bid'ah and is wrong and is bad. What's the answer? Any religion, any version of the Islam, you pick up a mushaf, that is not what, the Prophet didn't read from mushaf, did he? Right? Here's a hadith book. The Prophet didn't write hadith books, nor did he come up with the concept of isnad. It's all processed in reality. That's number one. Number two, the assumption is mistrust. They're all really bad people, which is not true. It's not true, right? So there's a academic error, okay, and there is a deep cynicism, right? And who's cynical? The Western people, right? So we have to understand this is also Western, right? Like, who thinks it's cool to have a kings and queens? Americans, you think it's cool to have kings and queens? Or is it stupid? Stupid and European. What do you think, guys? Where's our American friends? We're all American. Come on, guys. Who thinks King Charles rocks? Put your hand up. Nobody? Oh, you're Canadian, Yaqub? That's thinking, right? So the normal American would be like, give me a break, right? Give me a break. Kings and queens, that's so stupid because that's old. Everything old is stupid and dumb and pointless and whatever. Everything new is good, right? That's the normal way that a Western person thinks. Everything new is good. Everything old is bad, right? I'm not trying to say that King Charles rocks or anything like that. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm trying to say there is just the way that we think. You just think everything old, like, oh, that's old, that's stupid, right? That's just old and whatever, right? And so, um, it's a way of thinking that's very Western. So you have to understand that this deconstruction kind of thing, it's Western, it's modern, it's a new thing in the Muslim world. Nobody used to think like that. Nobody used to think like that. The way it used to work in the past is you're a tabi'i, you study with the previous generation and you build based on their teachings and you build and you build and you build. So the Sahaba built the Tabi'een built the former madhahib, built the former madhahib, edited and built themselves until you reach this stage of history. Okay? That's how it works. Tajweed, the history of Tajweed, the history of fiqh, the history of whatever it is, that's how it works. Right? So in my world of fiqh, there'll be certain books we reference, other books we don't. Like that's not really reliable because it's too early or it was, peer review edited out or whatever it is, right? In tafsir, this is that. In Arabic, in rhetoric, right? The science of rhetoric. The science of rhetoric didn't really exist until like this stage. So there's a science of Islamic rhetoric that we study today with key curricula and key references, and it's used throughout the sciences as a key and analytical tool. It's a product of like three different things that were happening here. They converged about this time, and then we have balagha at this time. But like balagha did not exist. So are you saying that we should not teach balagha because it didn't exist during the time of Prophet ﷺ? Or are you trying to say that the Prophet ﷺ the Sahaba started a ball rolling, right? It's not really Islamic rhetoric, it's Arabic rhetoric. And there's a difference. I'll tell you why in a second. Okay? Or are you trying to say the Sahaba started a ball rolling, which ended up to get where we were now? Okay? So I'll say, why is it not Islamic rhetoric? Because in this civilization, okay, there are things that are Islamic and the things that are not Islamic, meaning they're not peculiar to revelation. They're just a product of humans being in that civilization. So, for example, Arabic grammar, a Christian, right, might teach Arabic grammar because he's Arab, or he might teach Arabic rhetoric, how to analyze, sentence order, literary devices, but it's nothing to do with Islam itself. So it's not unique to Islam, but it is essential to understanding the Quran. Arabic grammar is not unique to Islam, so it's not from Islam. Arabic grammar doesn't come from the Quran. It's an external science that we use to analyze the Quran. Does that make sense, Sister Lizette? Like, so in Tajweed, okay, you have a Tajweed class, okay, and you're saying pa, and I say, no, it's ba, and you say pa, and I say, no, it's ba. And so I say, no, Sister Lizette, there's a P, which is unvoiced, and a B, which is voiced. So we'll have a term in Tajweed, majhura, mahmusa, voiced, unvoiced. So the concept of voiced and unvoiced is something you will do in a Tajweed class when you're learning how to pronounce the Quran properly. But that distinction between voiced and unvoiced is not in the Quran. The Quran didn't teach us about voiced and unvoiced letters. The Prophet didn't say, well, there's two types of letters, voiced and unvoiced. So it's a science that I use in Tajweed, and it's very much inside the masjid and we'll use it and terminology in these Islamic books, but it's not actually Islamic. It's just phonology in general. Does that make sense? Right? Or logic. At school, you'll learn logic. Okay? All A is B. Some B is C. What's the conclusion? So we'll learn 16 types of syllogisms. What could be concluded from these things? That's not Islamic per se, but it is important for a scholar to have studied logic, right? Otherwise, you're not logical, right? So these are called ulum ala. These are called tool knowledges, right? Knowledges that are tools for you, but they're not Islamic in and of themselves. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's repeat one more time. Civilization starts simple. Simple people, simple goals, they live a simple life, but they're strong and dedicated. They take over the fat and lazy people. Okay? And then through demand and cross generation, they make better buildings, they make better technology, their science becomes better, this becomes better. Of these many crafts, and sciences are the Islamic sciences. So the Islamic sciences, they begin simple, right? And then they get more and more complex and sophisticated, but they do the same goal. They're not something new. So every single Islamic science is a bid'ah, is an innovation that did not exist during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. But all of them are very useful things that express the goal of Islam and serve the goals of Islam and are very useful. And because they started off simple and they get progressively more sophisticated, we rely on the late, right, the late canons, right, the key reference books, teaching books, curricula, and we don't go back to here, right? One of my faults is I like going back to here. I teach a lot of things from back here, but it's very difficult because the students don't understand what's going on. Whereas this is like, this makes sense, right? Like I'm somebody who would do this. Imagine I'm doing physics, grade 8 physics. Like imagine reading, I say, hey, we're going to do Principia Mathematica in Latin by Newton. You're like, bro, give me a break. That's what I do. But that's not good pedagogy, right? It's not very good pedagogy, is it? Right? So if I was teaching grade 8 physics, would I read in Latin Newton's Principia Mathematica, or would you read a textbook that is based on things that are based on other things that are based on Newton's Principia Mathematica? Does that make sense? So you're looking at the textbook saying, no, I want Newton itself. Like if I'm doing Newtonian physics, I want to read Newton itself. Say, well, that's great, but you won't understand it. So let me give you something that's based on that and developed from that and is appropriate for your age and etc. Does that make sense? So this is processed and unprocessed. That's what it is. So then people come along in this period of history, at the lull, post-colonial period, and they say, no, I don't want processed Islam. I want unprocessed Islam. They call it Salaf, right? I want to follow, it's called the Salafi movement, which is great, and we all want to follow the Salaf. And that's the Salafi movement here created this. That's what it is. The Salaf created the early Muslims, created the later Muslims. That's what they are. So then they go back to here and they say, I want revelation itself. I want Quran itself. I don't need anything else. So then that means you don't want Arabic language, right? Because Arabic language is also one of these things. So you want to analyze the Quran and Sunnah without Arabic language, which is going to be quite exciting, meaning stupid and pointless. Anyway, so what they're going to do, they say, I just want an unprocessed Islam. I just want Islam itself. So what they'll do is first thing they'll throw out the form of dhahib because they say that's new, that didn't exist. So the form of dhahib, even though that's the processed version of halal and haram in the Quran and Sunnah, they just throw it out the window and say it's pointless. Then they try and go back here and they can't because you can't have actual revelation itself. You're not hearing the Prophet. So they look at a slightly edited version of Quran and Sunnah and they will ignore the fact that it is edited. Okay? So for example, they'll say things like, I just follow Quran and Sunnah and read Sahih Bukhari. Well, Sahih Bukhari is processed based on certain paradigms. But they say, and so they'll just ignore those paradigms. They just treat it as if it already existed. Okay. So then they say, I just want Quran and Sunnah. So that when you say halal, haram, they say, just give me Quran and Sunnah, not interested in anything. Their way of processing it, because it's very unprocessed, will be very, very um, unsophisticated and inaccurate in reality and full of errors. But it sounds good, right? So I'm going to make an analogy here. I'm going to turn the recording off, okay? I'm going to make an analogy, right? There's like one sister here today or two sisters here today? Two sisters here today, okay? Let's do an analogy, okay? And pause the recording, not embarrass anybody. And so now by analogy, in this processed version here, there are certain things that make practicing Islam very easy. Okay? So here, one of the things here is there's a lot of confusion. So the Prophet ﷺ, for example, he did not want to give people information overload. And he forbade people asking questions. He said, do what I tell you to do, and don't do what I've told you not to do. So they used to wait for the rude Bedouin to turn up and ask a dumb question, so to speak, to try and get information. So there are certain things the Sahaba were confused on. One of those things is what happens if a man dies, leaving brothers and a grandfather? Who gets the money and how do they get the money? So we understand that the father is closer to the deceased than the brother, but the grandfather and brother are equidistant, right, from the deceased. You connect to your grandfather through your father. You connect to your grandfather, you connect to your brothers through your father. So how does that all work? So the Sahaba, they used to say this, the pain that they were in suffering, they said, whoever wants to go to hell, give a fatwa here. Does that make sense? Like they didn't know what they were doing. They're like, we don't know what to do. Whoever wants to go to hell, give a fatwa. Go ahead. Like, it's up to you. So they were stuck and they wanted clarity. Along came their students and their students, and bit by bit, they've figured it out. And we're here today. You're in Pakistan. They follow the Hanafi school. It's like this. You're in Morocco. I don't know if they even apply that anymore, but you're in some country that's Maliki. This is how it is. Done. Easy. Here's the textbook. Thank you. Move on. They're very happy. And the Sahaba, if they saw the situation that we're in, they were like, oh, that's great. It's so easy for you. Does that make sense? Like Ibn Abbas, he said the following. He said, back in our day, right? Whenever somebody would quote the Prophet ﷺ, we would list very carefully because you could trust everybody. So nowadays, can't trust anybody. So Ibn Abbas, as a precaution, has just stopped listening to anybody. So that means you don't really have a system of which hadith to trust, which hadith not to trust. That caution and that problem across his society, next generation, created something called the hadith critical analysis. We have this whole system. It's all very sophisticated. We have lists of narrators and and you can go and find out what you can rely on and what you can't rely on. So we have a system that he didn't have. And we have a luxury that he didn't have. Does that make sense? So we're not trying to say we're better than him, is that we built that generations came, they have the same problem, the same issue, and they build, and they solve the problem, right? We have electricity, but it's super dangerous. How do you manipulate electricity, right? We're not trying to say that the people of the past, whoever, who electrocuted the frog, whoever that scientist, we're not trying to say he doesn't know or he's not good. We're just trying to say that we got that idea and we rolled with it, right? Question: if you electrocute a frog and it moves, is electricity life? Question. Next generation person comes along and says, no, it's not actually. This is something else. This is, okay. So then what's happening then? And you keep going, keep rolling with it, and you get to a certain level of sophistication that, oh, I can manipulate electricity for my own use. Thank you. Alhamdulillah. So you are asking for confusion when you had clarity. You are asking for purity, right? You are asking for the original when the original is edited here. This makes sense. And I'll find it, inshallah. There's many of them will say that. At least two you'll find. So you can look at Darimi. So look in Sunan Darimi, and yeah. Oh, look in Sunan Darimi, look in I'm pretty sure it's in Kitab al-Ilm as well. Sunan al-Darimi, look in the inheritance section. Make sense, guys? So it's an issue, it's not an issue of new religion, it's an issue of processed religion, right? So here it's very processed and nice. I know what you're saying. So for example, a man used this term, he said valid. So if you can imagine you're a Sahabi, what's the difference between valid and accepted? Valid versus accepted. It's not a very clear term, is it? Like, does Allah accept this? No. What? So does it mean I have to do it again? No. So meaning he accepts it then. Says no. Okay, what do you mean? So we have certain terms, right? And there might be a term in between. Some scholars, they have valid, invalid, and off. So what do you mean by off? What's that? Oh, it's slightly different. It could be fixed. It's not invalid, right? And so these terminology and structures, these are all ways that we can analyze the Quran and Sunnah and make life easy for us. I can talk about it meaningfully and I can quickly come up to solutions as opposed to being continually dealing with lots and lots of very, very complex systems, right? Or analyze them in an unobjective way, right? Does that make sense? I'll give you another analogy, right? Who here is from Indo-European background? So Aman, Indo-European, Lizette, Indo-European, Renee, Indo-European, right? Anybody else? Indo-European, okay? So yes, no? Who's here? Thumbs up. Indo-European background, yeah? So next week, I'm going to do the class in Indo-European and not in English because that will like gather us, right? Lizette, she's from a Hispanic speaking, so it's kind of more like a common ground, right? Aman, you're from like a, right? No, I'm going to do it in Indo-European. I'm going to speak Indo-European. I'm not going to speak Spanish or English or Urdu or Hindi. Just Indo-European. No, not Indo-Iranian, Indo-European. What's wrong with that, guys? Doesn't exist. I don't know what it is. Unprocessed. Thank you very much. So English, there's this demand by people, Indo-Europeans, 5,000 years ago. They spread out into a little group. There's a demand to communicate. They keep communicating and they eventually get English, eventually get Spanish, eventually get Urdu, eventually get Turkish, eventually get Greek, eventually get this. So I'm trying to go back and I want to unprocess all of that. I won't be able to communicate to you. And here's a good question. What if I came up, I tried to reconstruct Indo-European? Could you find my errors, Aman? Like I'm gonna speak Lizette, I'm gonna speak Spanish, okay? Correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Soy mucho happy perché soy teaching. What's wrong? Am I objectively wrong, Sister Lizette? Could you objectively say that I can't speak Spanish?
Yes, you can't speak
You can, right?
Spanish.
But if I sat and gave this class in Indo-European and I went back and I tried to reconstruct my own version of what the Prophet really, really said, there's no way you can check if I'm right or wrong. Is there? Right? So that means I can just do whatever I want. And that's exactly what will happen today. Because if I don't reference this period, There's no real checks and balances. I can kind of do whatever I want. So I go back to here and I say, no, the Prophet never allowed things like that. The Prophet always allowed things like that. The Prophet would have never done that. The Quran always encourages this. I just have my own interpretation. And there are no checks and balances of interpretive methods, nor of conclusions. I can just say whatever I want. And so I can just have a new deen and I can claim it's the old deen. I can do whatever I want, right? Because you have no real ability to really assess it. So this conversation, like, was that real Spanish or not? It's not there. So therefore it's a free for all. And so do you think post-colonial Muslims wanted a free for all? Yes. Post-colonial powers wanted a new religion. So you say, yeah, that's a good way to create a free for all. Tell them the romantic idea of going back. How can we unite the Indo-European people? Have them speak Indo-European. Yeah, but what's Indo-European? I don't even know how to speak it. You couldn't actually construct it with any level of accuracy. I mean, like 2% level accuracy. Same thing. Right? It's the same thing. You're going to come back and say, what is that? That's why we use, when you say traditional Islam, I like to use the word traditional with a capital T, right? It's like there's a traditional period, approximately 5th to 8th century. That's you get this maturity of all the sciences. That's the standards, right? That's the standard. It's slightly different is that with how the Bible was changed, slightly different. But here what I'm talking about is there's no standard here. So I don't like to use the word Salafi, but a Salafi is unfalsifiable. Because whenever you say he's wrong, he will say, no, it says it in the Quran and Sunnah. And if you say, I don't agree with you, he's like, yeah, but that's because you're wrong. So it's basically your interpretation against his. Whereas here, if I make a mistake, somebody's going to say you're wrong. And it happens, right? I gave an answer. Sheikh Omar Mohsin contacts me and says, you're wrong. And I'm like, no, you're wrong. And he says, here's the references. Oh, I'm wrong. Oh, sorry. You know what I'm saying? Like there's actual checks and balances. There's a legal system, there's a moral system, there's an academic, the actual, there's no checks and balances. It's kind of nebulous. You're just walking into a cloud and trying to think what it was, possibly. Okay? And so it's really convenient if you want to be a self-made scholar because you can say whatever you want. Okay? So that's how a Salafi works. It's cool. It's very quick. It's interesting. It's very, it can move around a lot, right? But it doesn't really make any sense, right? Like I'm going to dress like the natives of California. Where are they? Where are the natives of California? I'm doing a traditional thing that they did. Where are they? You can't find them anymore. You have little pockets here and there. So it's something you're trying to mimic something you don't have any information about. Right? I speak Middle English. Now, Middle English you can copy, right? So the curriculum is also super fast, right? The curriculum is super fast because there's very little anything, right? So it's fast. It's fast and furious, right? It's fast. It's quick. It's gratifying because it's like this is super complex and boring, right? Whereas this is like, yeah, it's cool. Like here's the Quran and Sunnah. It feels good. It's like energizing, but it's very unsophisticated. It's like it's not. It's not what these people wanted. These people built this, right? And a very good testimony to that is Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. So he's a sheikh in this period here. Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali. He has a book, 2 books. One of them says the importance and how their knowledge was better than these people's knowledge. And he has another book where he says you have to follow the form of their him. So he has like 2 books that almost contradict each other. These people, he says their knowledge was better than their knowledge. But at the same time, he's saying we have to rely on this knowledge. It's like, how can you be contradictory? He's not contradictory. He's saying their view of knowledge, the Salaf, the way that their attitude, the way that they viewed knowledge and practice and these things was better, right? But these people have edited it out and organized it, and so this is what we rely on. For example, the same author, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, he has a book on legal maxims found in Hanbali fiqh. He's Hanbali. So he's taking Hanbali fiqh as processed for 500 years, and then the maxims that they talk about, and put that in a book. right? So it's like super, super processed. But at the same time, he writes a book saying these are better. So Ibn Abbas is better than 1,000 scholars today, of course. But Ibn Abbas is unprocessed. So what we have today is we are, as Newton said that, he said, if we saw far, we did but stand on the shoulder of giants, right? So these people are standing on the shoulders of these people, of these people, of these people, of these people. That's what's happening. Cross-generation cooperation. And so the net effect is greater, even if the early scholars were better. Does that make sense? Like the final touches of a piece of art are the best, even though maybe the original sketches were somebody else, right? That makes sense. We're going over time, inshallah, but this is super unbelievably important. And again, I'm not talking about Salafis in terms of Salafis. Somebody's a Salafi and the righteous person, no problem. I'm talking about as a concept of a way of thinking, that two ways of thinking. I can access revelation directly, so why would I access it indirectly? You can't. B, one second. B, negative, having su'adhan, right? Having a bad opinion of the past, that's a problem. So get out of those two things. I don't care what group you're in. Salafi, Ikhwani, Muhammad Sadiqi, I don't care what group you're in, right? It doesn't matter. Another analogy is that the foundation of the building is the strongest, sturdiest part, but you don't live, right? You don't even see the foundation, right? Exactly. Okay, any last questions or queries?
You reserve one, yeah? I think so. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
There's something that I want to, I don't know if you talked about it during the time that I couldn't hear the audio, but in chapter 4, his build up of explanation of society in terms of the Bedouins and the city dwellers and the result of the sedentary lifestyle in the form of degradation of society. I think that is super important, and it is important in a manner that builds into this analogy, because these Bedouins, the early Muslims, they were Bedouins, and their situation, their society was very, very simple. As Islam moved quickly into sedentary spaces, that level of knowledge naturally had to progress in order to engulf and process these people. And I think that this is something that we really need to take a step back and really reanalyze, because it will be the situation that we go into now. So like one of the things that I tell the kids now, like you need to imagine all of your current city that you live in accepting Islam carte blanche, like the whole city just accepts Islam, or 50% or 30% of the city just says Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. How you process that is going to be different. So if there was a Bedouin or a simplistic population, that would be different than if there is a sedentary population. And I think that he was building into that argument, and I don't know if that was necessarily encapsulated.
Yeah.
But this
So
is something
there's two things here I want to say, Muhammad Salih. Number one is, so let's think about so sedentary life and the cancers of sedentary life, right? I'm lazy and I'm fat. I'm not fighting for something new, and I'm happy to be abused on some level by a corrupt ruler and kind of be excluded as long as I'm still have my perks, right? So here's a question. This aspect or this vein of civilization, which is the Islamic sciences, is it susceptible to cancer? The answer is yes. So here's a problem. Somebody who's part of this system, like myself, you come up to me and say, but Sheikh Farid, with all due respect, aren't there some funny things that have come here and there? And you're like, no, it's perfect. You say, well, Farid, what do you mean it's perfect? Isn't it created by humans? So yeah, but it's perfect. So it's not though. So you will find throughout history people who come along and critique a system from within, not from without. They're like, hang on a minute. there is a cancer in this system, right? Ibn Khaldun himself, for example, criticizing certain curriculums. It's like, what you're doing in your curricula is great, but it's off. There's things are good, but it's off here. So so things inside. So when you study any tradition, tajweed, hadith, tafsir, you will find certain things like that, where they'll be like, is this a bit weird? Like, why are we doing this? You know? Or somebody became an authority on something he shouldn't be. And suddenly he's quoted generation after generation. It's like, that's not right. And so you will find people in these systems that will identify small or big cancers and eliminate them, right? That's an important thing, number one. The problem is people will come along and say, oh, I identified a cancer, kill the whole thing, right? And that's not true. Like, so an organism or having a cancer doesn't mean it's not an organism, and doesn't mean it can't get over, and it doesn't mean you can't edit it out. That's number one. So that's an important thing to note. Number two, yes. So he's mentioning as society changes. So that's what happens. For example, if you look at the beginning of Islam, the first 200 years approximately, there was no such thing as something called theology. Kalam did not exist. So these people, the Salaf, for example, they say, no, I'm on the Aqidah of the Salaf, which isn't an Aqidah, because they didn't talk Aqidah. So now you come into a new world where it's the Abbasids, and there's lots of non-Arabs and lots of non-Muslims, and they don't agree with you. And previously, in the time of the Sahaba, it was different. In the time of the Umayyads as well, the Umayyads had this Arabism about them. Like, if you're not Arab, you don't count. So just be quiet. And that worked politically and intellectually to some extent. With the Abbasids, that didn't work. So you're now 200 years after the Prophet ﷺ, and somebody comes up and says, yeah, I accept that God exists, but I don't think he created the universe, because the universe has always been here. So you're like, what are you talking about? So yeah, but logically, you can change matter, but you can't create matter. So yeah, God changed the universe, but he didn't create the universe, right? And then they're like, yeah, but it says in the Quran. So, yeah, but I don't believe in the Quran. So now how are you going to deal with that? And now that I have influence, how are you going to deal with me? So this is what happened in the Abbasid period. In the Abbasid period, suddenly you have this influx of Hellenistic ideas, Persian ideas, Indian ideas, right? And people who are not just going to listen. So now you have to tackle them on an intellectual, philosophical level before you bring them to religious level. So that brings in the whole thing about logic, philosophy, and scholastic theology, kalam. So these things did not exist, and there was no need for them. No need for them. Right? And then if you go back to a Bedouin society, I'm in the middle of the desert, you don't need to talk about Descartes and Hume and Aristotle and Plato. Whereas, hey, I'm in New York. Yes, you do. You know, yes, you do. Like my brother, he's doing this thing on evolution. I'm like, evolution is a non-discussion. Because for me, it's like a non-discussion. He said, yeah, for you, Fareed, but the rest of the world is huge. For the rest of the world, like, it's a problem, right? Is Adam a metaphor, or is it something else? So what kind of world are you talking to? Fareed's world, where I live in the world of Islamic books, or the normal world out there where that's not actually an authority, and you now need to talk to me on my level, right? So that's an important thing as well. So yes, did sciences and discussions and approaches develop at different stages depending on how this society was? 120%. I have to run, inshallah, and exactly. So look at calligraphy, Sister Ma'ab. Look at calligraphy at the beginning of Islam. Look at calligraphy later. Same thing. It's not really an Islamic science, but it is kind of. It is. It is an Islamic art. It is an Islamic art, meaning an art that is infused with the spirit of Islam, and it has isnad as well. But it's not really an Islamic art. We don't like if you ask someone like me, in my world, we don't consider Islamic science, right? But if you look at the development of it, the development of Arabic calligraphy, same thing. This diagram. Find out when the key naskh thuluth. It's probably this time, or maybe a bit later, maybe this time. Same thing. They didn't have naskh and thuluth and all these things at this time. It was developing, and then it's more like here, I think, Allahu A'lam, that you have this. It's actually a bit later, but the same concept. Bedouin Muslim, city Muslim. His calligraphy is different. His mushaf is different. Illumination of the page, different. A masjid is different. It's the same thing, but it's different. The same direction, but you're different. It's the same ball being thrown from one garden to the other, but you're at a different, t equals a different number, right? It was the same y equals x squared plus this, right? Or whatever it is to get the ball going up and down, however the math is, right? But you're a different t, right? So you'll see it at different stages, right? خير. I got to stop here, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.